Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, it's time for another movie review. This time it's of the 2024 monster film in the latest in Legendary Pictures MonsterVerse, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. This is a direct sequel to the previous entry, which was Godzilla vs. Kong, itself a sequel both to Godzilla King of the Monsters and Kong Skull Island, and a more modern remake of Kong vs. Godzilla that Toho did back in the day, which was the third entry in their original Showa Godzilla series. And of course at that time a very big deal, since it pitted the two most popular kaiju monsters, the one that started it all in Kong and Toho's big boy Godzilla, against each other. Now this one, or should I say its predecessor, was a long overdue one, because we all know Toho tried to remake it back in the 90s in the Heisei series, but they weren't allowed to for copyright reasons. So if there was any entry in this MonsterVerse series that was anticipated, it was Godzilla vs. Kong. And my only regret is I didn't get a chance to see it in theaters. So when this one was announced, I'm like, yeah, I definitely got to see it in theaters. And I have to say, I was not disappointed. With this entry, you can definitely see that Legendary Pictures is going in the direction of fun films, kind of like the Showa series did, which is interesting because it means it's following the same trajectory where they started with the more serious take, and then as the series progressed it got more and more. The only difference is, whereas with the Showa series they were doing that for the first time, with this one it's a direction they're going with because of a lot of the criticism, mostly with the 2014 one with the cutaway during the monster fights, which I get. And of course the next couple ones is the monsters, you see more of it now. It's really going in that direction. I don't mind it, I just hope it gets a little bit more serious with the subsequent ones, depending on who they fight. But considering that it's a series about giant monsters and they're fighting at this point, there's only so much more serious you can get. You mean you could get a little bit more serious if Destroya is introduced, but that's only if they do him. How they go after this, it's going to depend. Like, will Kong get his own solo films again? And it's one of those things that, if you look at the history of the Godzilla series, probably not likely. But then again, it could happen. I mean, Mothra got her own solo trilogy after being in nothing but Godzilla's films since her intro film, but every other monster, once they crossed into the Godzilla series, they stayed in his orbit. Rodan never got another solo film. Manda never got another solo film, and none of the other ones that were solo ones got it, so there's that. But then again, Kong kind of did, but that's because of the special copyright involving Kong, so Kong might be an exception there. Anyway, this film is directed by Adam Wingard, who also did the Death Note one for Netflix, Blair Witch for 2016, but he also did the predecessor, Godzilla vs. Kong, so we shouldn't hold those ones against them. And you can definitely tell there's some direction, continuity between this and the previous one, which makes sense if you're going to go with that and like try to keep some of the same people on board. And you get that a little bit with the characters, because each of these films, they've been carrying over characters from the previous one, whereas we lose one character from the previous film. That of course is the character played by everyone's favorite modern day child turned adult actress from Stranger Things. We still get the conspiracy theory guy, the doctor, and her adopted daughter, so they stay there, which is one thing I don't mind. I know the Showa series itself, it kept actors if not characters, but the Heisei series, it did keep characters, mainly of course the telepathic character Miki Sagusa, but I don't expect them to go in that direction. Now this movie takes place 3 years after Kong and Godzilla had their showdown in Hong Kong, followed by them teaming up to defeat Mechagodzilla. Kong is still in the Hollow Earth. He has fully established his territory there, and he's continuing to search for more of his kind, and it's not going good. He's surviving, but it's getting difficult, like we see one scene early on where his tooth is broken and it's starting to get infected, so he has to come up, and the humans have to do a quick little bit of dental surgery while also hoping Godzilla doesn't notice. Because while they had that truce at the end of it, it's kind of a very, very tenuous truce. to where if anything goes wrong, it's going to be, you picked the wrong house, fool, type of situation. To where they're both Alpha Titans, so they'll start fighting again. Now, while this is going on, Godzilla is trying to maintain order between humanity and the other Titans. And we see that he's fighting some of the ones about to him, like Skelia, which was that giant spider one we saw at the end of King of the Monsters. Godzilla kills that in Rome, and then we get a nice little cute scene where Godzilla's sleeping in the Colosseum. Now, Kong eventually goes back into the Hollow Earth, followed, of course, by the scientists. They're watching him, but they also got their own theories about what's down there. Now, as they go back down there, we find out Kong is not the only one of his species, as the trailer showed. There are other members. We get the little kid Kong, which the moments between him and Kong are nice and cute. And, of course, because of the fact Kong has his axe, of course, there's the usual Kong of War meme jokes you could throw in there. And then, of course, now all we need is those edits of Kong yelling, "Boy!" And it's a nice little thing. You definitely tell that the mini Kong has not been around other members of his species in a positive light. And the fun thing is that even though he looks like he's a very, very young character, apparently he's supposed to be the same size that Kong was in Skull Island. Which of course shows the difference in attitudes there. Now, as Kong and the little one are making their way back further into the under part of Hollow Earth, the humans down there are finding out a little bit more and giving us a little bit more lore dump, which one of them would have been interesting to learn earlier, but of course these characters weren't created earlier. And that's where we get the new kaiju. We get Scar King, who is another member of Kong's species, who is essentially, he's the alpha of all the members of Kong's species that live in the underpart of Hollow Earth. But it's like he's, I don't really like using the term, but he's like a beta Alpha Titan, if that makes sense. Where he's the Alpha Titan, but only because he's the only one that was allowed to be an Alpha Titan. In other words, he kind of controlled everything. If it wasn't for that, then he probably would have been ousted long ago. And with the lore, he was one of the Kong Titans that fought Godzilla the last time they had their little war. Whether he's supposed to be one of the ones depicted in the art we saw, or if that was just a loose thing, but Godzilla apparently sealed him and the rest of them in the Hollow Earth, which explains why Godzilla was kind of going after Kong the last time. But also Scar King, he has an ally in the ancient ice-powered Titan Shimo, which there was a lot of theories that maybe Shimo was another member of Godzilla's species, but I don't know if I would say she's another Godzillasaur, but she's definitely a related Titan species because of her whole dynamic. Now, Scar King, just like how he rules the under Hollow Earth with an iron fist when it comes to his own species, so he does with Shimo, where he controls her with this one ice crystal. Not shown a lot in the marketing, but in the film it makes it pretty clear that's the only reason that Shimo listens to Scar King. So they have an abusive relationship dynamic, and the way that Scar King is played on camera, you really believe it. Like, the trailers kind of made it seem like Scar King and Kong were more evenly matched, but if it wasn't for him having Shimo, Scar King would have been beaten very easily just by Kong alone, because Kong was whooping him. He was beating him like a government mule, to use the wrestling phrase. And Scar King, you can tell from the get-go he thinks he's going to easily beat Kong, but then once they actually fight, he sees Kong actually is no joke. But if Shimo is the one, mainly because of her power, her gimmick as it were, that causes Kong to have to retreat, and that's why, as you see in the trailer, he has that robotic hand. But you know, a lot of people are saying, well, he's got to get some kind of gimmick in order to fight Godzilla, because other than the axe, what has he got? Which makes sense. I mean, that's why in the original Kong vs. Godzilla, they gave Kong that lightning power-up, where electricity makes him stronger, and then while it's charged through him, he can channel it through his hands. So him having the Robo-Claw makes sense. And of course, you know, they're eventually going to have to meet up, and Kong and Godzilla have another little bout in Egypt, which, before this, Godzilla goes and kills another one of the Titans. It's the dragon one, which is essentially the stand-in for Manda, or I guess you could say inspired kind of by Manda with the design, but also feeds on nuclear energy. And it made a little sense that this would happen at this point. I mean, Kong Godzilla being the Alpha Titan, having to reestablish order, and this one seeming to want to go and consume all the nuclear energy without any regard for the planet or the humans that live on it. Godzilla is collecting it because he can sense what's going on. Like, he can sense the Kongs are going to live more active, and probably also sense Shimo. So he goes, kills this thing, which I don't know if it's intended, but it seems like it's a little reference to the one bit of footage they filmed in Destroy All Monsters where Godzilla and Manda fought that's been shown at a lot of fan festivals. And of course Godzilla easily wins, absorbs all the radiation from that spot, and this is before Kong comes up. Kong calls Godzilla. Godzilla goes to challenge him, and of course Kong is trying to talk Godzilla down because he needs his help. But I love the little body language they give Kong. He's like, wait. But Godzilla's like, you got me the wrong hood, fool, as it were. And they get into their little fight, destroy the pyramids at Giza. Now, the film kind of makes it seem like Godzilla was about to instantly win the fight before Mothra shows up. Which, yes, Mothra does return, and they throw a whole little subplot with the Iwi, the native people of Kong's Island, with a whole prophecy about an Iwi from Skull Island coming to resurrect Mothra. Which, that had me kind of scratching my head a little bit. Is like, how would that go in there? And for the writing, it just seems like for convenience sake they threw that in there in order to give the human characters something else to do in the Hollow Earth besides just follow Kong and all that, which in the context of the film it makes sense, and it ties into the whole subplot involving the Iwe adopted child and her adopted mother, where she's having trouble adapting to the normal part of human world, partially because of the fact she's from Skull Island, but also because she's deaf and all that. But it's more on the fact that she is from Skull Island. The fact that she's deaf and has to do sign language is more of a side thing with it. And it ties into that whole thing, and it's more from the doctor's point of view, where she feels that like her daughter's going to want to stay there with the other Iwe, and that she can't really give her everything she needs. And of course it ends, of course, with a thing like I Belong With You, which was a nice little touching moment, and the two actresses, they do a great job with what they do there in that moment. But of course the Mothra subplot, like I said, is only there for them to do something that they need to do. But of course Mothra's back. It's nice to see Mothra again. Makes me wonder, if it wasn't for this thing, what Mothra would have been doing in the previous film. But Mothra shows up and essentially plays a mediator between Kong and Godzilla and gets them to calm down and realize that there's a bigger threat at the moment that they need to go tackle themselves, which of course leads to that scene we see in the trailers where they both are running next to each other, which leads to a tag team fight of Kong and Godzilla versus Shimo and Scar King, which is a two-part fight. There's a part in the underground in Hollow Earth, where I believe it's in a couple trailers where we get that moment where Scar King's on the back of Shimo and Kong gets on the back of Godzilla as they're jumping up. Now, Shimo is a bit bigger than Godzilla, but not as powerful, because in a certain way, I mean, she's got all that ice power, but Godzilla's got all that nuclear power, and his radioactive breath can melt stuff, so you can see where they're going to balance out. Now, they end up fighting on the surface in Rio de Janeiro, and Shimo starts freezing stuff. Scar King gets up there, and it's eventually going to be a tag team fight up there as well. Now, my favorite part of this fight is near the end, and that is when the crystal gets destroyed, and we see that Shimo, and I know this is a minor spoiler, but I feel I need to talk about this part of the fight in order to, I have to bring up the spoiler, and that is, you can see Shimo hesitates and is like, why am I doing this? And then of course she turns on Scar King and freezes him. And at that moment you see that the only reason she was ever listening to Scar King was because of the crystal that was causing her pain. Which is a nice little Turbout's fair play moment there, where she's like, yeah, I'm not listening to you anymore, you got no leverage. And then of course Kong kills Scar King, which we all know if it was just one-on-one without Shimo or Godzilla, Scar King would have lost to Kong ages ago. So it's a nice little moment there. And of course balance is returned on the surface, balance is returned in the Hollow Earth, and Kong essentially takes over Scar King's position as the leader of the Kong tribe, and he has what he was always searching for, a family. I mean, the little one essentially becomes his adoptive son, which he plays a little bit of a role in there. And of course, the earlier scene, I haven't talked about it yet, Kong essentially uses him as nunchucks in one part. Oh. So Kong is now the king of the underworld, and Godzilla remains the king of the upper world, which makes you wonder what could happen in a potential follow-up film. Now, the music is done by Tom Hulkenberg and Antonio Di Loria. If I'm pronouncing that right. It fits for the film. I kind of miss some of the tracks from the previous ones where we got versions of the classic films, but it is what it is there. Cinematography by Ben Saracen. It works for what this film is doing. Now, I got to bring this up at this point now. Since this does follow in the Oscar winner Godzilla Minus Zero, you got to know these are totally different ones. Whereas Minus Zero is definitely more of a reinterpretation of the themes and stuff explored in the original film in Godzilla 85, a little bit in Legendary's first Godzilla film, and of course in a different way in Shin Godzilla. It's going to be a bit more serious, even if there are some fun moments like when Godzilla is chasing the fish boat. This one, like I said, is more like some of the later Showa entries. Now, of course, the CGI is done a little bit more photorealistically in Minus Zero than it is here. Here, it's a little bit more cartoony, but for what it goes with, it fits what they're going with, even though the budget is drastically larger. Like, I think the special effects budget was only like not even 15 million, and I think that was in yen for Minus Zero, whereas the total budget here was at the higher end, 150 million, which is pretty large, but for the budgets you see for some of these blockbusters, I think that's like on the mid to lower end of the spectrum. Like some of them you've seen like 200 to 300 million, but of course going down, that's actually pretty good. And unlike some of the other ones, you don't got like super expensive stars in this one. I think probably the biggest budget expense other than the special effects and the marketing would probably be for a licensing thing, but that'd probably depend on what deal they had previously. Alright. As you can see, I definitely plan on getting this one once it comes out on DVD and Blu-ray. And I do look forward to a possible sequel. And according to Wikipedia here, the director has expressed interest in making a third film with both Godzilla and Kong, but it depends on how this one does and how things kind of shape out. Now, I wouldn't mind these two being in another film, but I think at this point, you should probably wait for like an Endgame film, because Kong should be off doing his old thing. And unless you're going to do like a cameo thing, kind of like how Kong did in King of the Monsters, or kind of like how they did in some of the beginning films where they use stock footage in some of the Showa ones. The only other way I could see things going is if you're going to do a modern version of Destroy All Monsters, or if you're going to do something with Destroyer. Because at this point, just let them be. I mean, you can have Godzilla fight other solo opponents, maybe Kong have a little cameo depending how you do the scenes, but them doing another adventure together should either be one of those two things. But that's just the way I'm looking at it, and some people would probably say, what do you know? Yeah, what do I know? I'm just a long-term Godzilla fan who's been a fan of this series for at least 30 years, and just looking at it, at how the series has progressed and how things probably should go in the future, but what do I know? All in all, this is a fun film. It's like like I said, it's like a modern-day Showa film with just an exceptionally larger budget. How do I stack it up against the previous films? Good question. I haven't actually watched all the films in a row, so I don't know how they would stack up against each other. Definitely, I can definitely say how the third act of the Godzilla 2014 film was. That's how I was feeling throughout the entire film. About the same probably as I was when I was watching the previous film and King of the Monsters, so definitely in the higher one. If you didn't really like the first Legendary one, but you liked the Skull Island, you like King of the Monsters, you should like this one. It might not be your favorite of them, but you should get your money's worth, depending on how much your tickets are. Like if they're at the higher end where they're 20, you definitely should get your money's worth out of it. Especially if you are a long-time Godzilla fan like I am. Grew up with them as a kid or whatnot. It definitely is worth your time to go out of your way to watch this one. And I'm not the only one thinking that, because it's already grossed over 400 million, which puts it at the 5th highest grossing film of the year, which, in case you're wondering, at currently, well, I guess it's the 5th now, because currently the highest grossing film of the year is Doom Part 2, which I got to talk about soon. YOLO, oh, that's why, overseas ones. Kung Fu Panda 4 made more money than Godzilla, wow. A little surprise there. And then, of course, Beekeepers and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire at the 10 and 9th spots, respectively. But that's really all I have to say about this film. So, until next time, everybody.